Um, well, we're going to be talking about the document object model,
Okay.
which is what DOM stands for.
Okay.
And uh, as we talked about, this is an introductory guide for automating pages with AutoHotkey. And usually this is something that um, many people are afraid of it, but it is really, really simple once you get a hang of it. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
cannot go into detail for every single little thing about it,
No, no.
but
I
I'll
trust you.
go, yeah, I'm gonna go over the most important aspects in a way that we start now, and after we finish this, you can automate almost anything you want. Because what I'm gonna give you is enough for you to actually start automating easily. And later on, if you have more, I'm actually going to link you to some resources as well that you can use to get more information in case there's something that you don't know how to do. Like we can get there as well.
Yeah.
But in general, what I'm going to teach you is going to be like more than enough. Now, first of all, what is a document object model? Well, in general, when you're browsing using well, it can be Internet Explorer, which is dead now. It's Edge now,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually a Chrome thing. So basically, let's talk about Chrome.
Yeah. Let's talk about something that I'm going to be able to use in the future.
Right. So that's what we are going to, whenever I'm referring to the browser, I'm going to be referring to Chrome. And what happens is that Chrome grabs some text, which is marked up with the HTML, and it decides how to display it. Now, the browser itself gives access to several objects. The main one that we're going to be actually working with is the window object. That's the root object.
Mm-hmm.
And that particular object exposes more objects. So there are objects within objects. Okay. Now, that's the reason why the name is the document object model, because we're talking about objects here. And even if you don't know nothing about them, there's a section in this presentation that deals a little bit with them, so you can have a general sense of it. But basically, we're working within the root object, which exposes some of them, like, for example, the history object. Have you noticed that when you're in a browser and you go the next page or you go back in the pages, like that's actually an object. You
Mm-hmm.
don't realize it, but that's an object.
Okay.
The same as the location object. You know that when you open your browser and you just Google for something, it knows that you're in the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's an object in there that keeps track of the location and some other functions that have to do with that. That's the location object, which you can see here.
Oh. Okay.
But the one that we're actually most interested in is a document object. And that one actually exposes the whole HTML in a way that we can use in our programs and actually interact with it. The browser uses that object for its own, but it also exposes the object for programmers like us. And in that case, we can actually automate things. And that's the reason why the document object is very important. In this case, for our document object, you have noticed that I marked up some things in different colors. You have some things like, the tags, right? The tags
Mm-hmm.
are those HTML tags like the body, the H1, the P, and so on. Those guys in yellow are elements.
I know how I know of them, but I don't know how to manipulate them in any way.
That's what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay.
But um, the core concept that I do want to drive home is the fact that even though I'm calling them an element,
Mm-hmm.
they are a type of object. Okay, so those are objects, and each of those objects can have some other little tiny things like attributes, or text, and some other things that we don't care that much about. But the attributes, which are marked in red here, are very important. What is our goal? Our goal when we're actually programming is that we want to access a specific element in the website. That's our goal. And the easiest way that we can do that is actually identifying it via the ID attribute. Okay.
Okay.
So,
Oh. Okay.
so there's an attribute in there that is called ID. Now, unfortunately, all attributes are optional, And that means that some elements do not have an ID, or if they do not have an ID, they also do not have a class. And those are things that I can use to identify them easily. I can identify them anyways, even if they do not have an ID or a class. But usually, if you have an ID, you're good to go because you can refer to that specific object, that element is in particular, just by knowing its ID.
Okay.
So um, now that we know what our goal is, let's go ahead and get some ideas about object basics. And my first question would be, you know how objects work in programming? Have you ever worked
Well,
with them before?
an object is uh, is a conglomeration of different elements within one name of an object. Is that
Yeah,
right?
you've got pretty much the basic idea of it. I can just simply group things like functions and variables into a specific type of thing. But let me go through some very basic
Oh,
ideas.
listen. I want to just pretend I'm a third grader and never seen this before,
Not a problem.
because this is stuff that I can't remember all the time, and that's why
Yeah, not a
I learned
problem.
this. Hmm.
So basically, let's go ahead with a quick analogy. So you work doing networks and stuff, right? So
Right.
you work a lot with routers. Now, routers such as this one has, I don't know, like some USB ports. Some of them have 4 or 5 Ethernet ports. All of them have antennas,
Hmm.
and usually they work basically the same. So if I get this guy here, the Netgear, I can still say that's a router, even though it only has 3 antenna and it has less USB ports and probably it has less Ethernet ports, but I still classify them as an object called router. Okay, so in programming, we do something very similar. There are 3 things that define what an object is in the real world, and that's what we try to do in programming, because it's kind of like intuitive for us because that's what we do all the time.
Hmm.
First of all, objects that are of the same class, like for example, routers, they have common properties. Some of the properties are how many antennae they have, how many Ethernet ports, how many
Hmm.
USB ports, those kind of things.
Yep.
They also share actions that can be performed. For example, with a router, I can connect to
Hmm.
I don't know, to another router or to another computer. I cannot drive it because that's not a car. A car I can drive, but a
Hmm.
router I cannot drive it. So that's the idea of the actions that can be performed in an object. But there's something else. Even though they share common properties, those properties can vary between objects. As we see
Absolutely.
here, one of them has, I don't know, how many are those, like 8, 9 antenna, and the other one only has 3.
Hmm.
They do have antenna, but one of them has more than the other. And in some cases, the antenna is not outside sticking out, it's actually internal, right? So those properties can vary between them, but I still call them a router because they do the same things and they have similar properties with um, uh, the other routers that are the same. So the same thing can be said with um, programming objects.
Hmm.
Now, first of all, you understand the concept of a variable in
Yep.
which I can just go ahead and store something on it.
Hmm.
And you have seen functions, right?
I like
Which I
functions.
can call like that, right?
Hmm.
Now, for us, those things I could use throughout my code without any inconvenience. And, I can use it here, I can use it there, and it's the same for everybody. But I could just go ahead and define a specific type of object by defining a class, which is just the same intuitive concept. Like an object is a class of thing, right? So
Hmm.
we're going to create a class called router. And what I'm going to do is just the same as I'm doing up here by defining variables. I can do the same here. I just say like antenna equals, well, all my routers have at least one antenna. Well, you know what? I just want to make sure that I have like the brand, which is variable, the model, which is another one. I could have how many USB ports, at least one. I can have my, I don't know, Ethernet port
Hmm.
equals at least one. And then I also can have some actions, like for example, connect. Have my connect function here, which is just going to show a message box that says I'm connecting, or reset. I can reset the router, right? So I can do
Yep.
that.
Hmm.
So let's go ahead and do resetting. So now I have a collection of things, properties and methods. Now they look exactly the same as variables and functions because they are the same.
Hmm.
The reason why we change the name is because we don't want to get confused. If I talk about a property, I'm talking about a variable that is inside an object. And if I talk about a method, I'm talking about a function that is inside an object. That's all.
Can I
They
stop you
act
here for just one
exactly the
second?
same. Yeah,
All right. What I want you to do is part of this, like right here, just this little snippet you were just talking about.
right.
I would like you to make a promo thing of just this and say, and I'm going to say, this is just a snippet of what you get when they work with you.
Yeah, I can do that.
So I will share all that. I will make sure that people know about you. And so, I don't want to take away from the meeting, but I want you to understand that I think that just this right here shows your expert knowledge, and we can actually do an interaction where we're selling something, how to sell that. So we can do that later.
Okay, perfect. We're gonna do that. So in this case, as you can see, there's nothing weird about objects. The only difference is what I can do with them,
Hmm.
right? So now that you know that you can actually define variables and you can actually define functions inside this particular class, I could name several objects that have all those properties, exactly the same ones. Like for example, let's say I have my router one, right?
Hmm.
That one, I'm just going to define it as a new router. When I do that, what I do by just saying new router, I'm using router here because that's the name that I put for my class. I can use whatever name I want.
Hmm.
But if I use the keyword new, it is going to grab all these guys and it's going to store them in an object inside that variable that I just defined. And now I can have a second one. So I can have router two, new
Wow.
router. Now, although now that what that means is that now I can call router one dot connect, and what it's going to do is that it's going to grab this function that is copied for that one object, and it's going to use it. So in this case, it's going to be a message box, right? So if I
Hmm.
run that, I get my message box. But check this out. I can also do the same thing for router two, connect. Now I have to get two message boxes, one for router one for router two. That's all. Now, what's the point of all this? Check this out. One of the things that I can do is that I can set the brand name for one of them to be an Asus, and the brand name for router two um, is going to be right.
Hmm.
Now, they both have the same property, but I can set the property to one of them, which is router one, to one thing, and the router two can have a different property, and it's going to be okay. Like I'm not referring to something that is common between them. They made a copy of it.
Okay.
And now each of them has their own copy. So when I do a message box and say RT1 brand, what do you think I'm going to get?
Well, Ace.
Right? So that's what I should get. But if I just change, look, I'm not changing the variable name. I'm just changing which object I'm referring to. Now I get a different answer
Hmm.
because each of them has a copy of whatever set of options I set up in here, and the same for the functions themselves. Now, the powerful thing about objects, and that's the reason why you see them going in, in every single type of programming language, is that, well, you know what? I have a lot of code, I have a lot of objects, and now I figure out that I have to change one of the functions. I just don't want to go object by object and changing them. Well, you know
Hmm.
what? I just changed it once. I'm resetting now. I just changed it once. And now when I call that particular function,
Hmm.
it changes for all the objects. So all the objects have the new code. And that allows me to just go ahead and change whatever I want, and it's going to be updated everywhere at once, which
Hmm.
is very powerful. That's what objects are.